Hello and Happy New Year, and welcome back to 8 Spotlight. Today, we're joined by Lawrence Gentilello, founder of Optery, a company helping redefine what privacy looks like in the modern internet. Optery is a data privacy and removal platform used by hundreds of thousands of individuals and over 1,000 businesses to find and remove sensitive personal information from data brokers online. What began as a consumer first product has scaled into a major privacy infrastructure company with a large B2C business and a fast growing B2B platform trusted by security and privacy teams. In fact, they even doubled their sales last year. Today, Optery is an 8-figure recurring revenue company, built capital efficiently and still at the seed stage, proving that meaningful scale and impact doesn't require rushing the traditional fundraising playbook. We'll talk about building a privacy company at scale, navigating growth challenges, how AI is shaping the future of data protection, and why digital privacy is becoming a necessity, not a nice to have. Lawrence, welcome to the show and thank you for being here.
Thanks, Samantha. Thanks for the generous introduction. I'm really excited to chat today.
Me too. Okay, so I have to ask, what was the personal or professional moment that led you to start Optery?
Yeah, I had spent about 10 years in the consumer data space, and I started off at a company called Blue Kai, which was one of the early leaders in marketing data. And Blue Kai was acquired by Oracle, and it became the foundation for the Oracle Data Cloud. I was the lead product manager there for that data management platform. And then I was recruited to Accenture, and I led Accenture's data management platforms practice for about 3.5 years. And so I was really thinking about consumer data for about a decade, really just in the front lines with collecting data and using it for personalized experiences and personalized ads. And during that time, the space went from what I felt to be a little more innocent, delivering targeted ads for personalized advertising, to much more nefarious and dangerous, where data was increasingly being used by attackers. And hackers and attackers were using similar playbooks that digital marketers used to execute social engineering and phishing campaigns. And so I felt like there was this big problem and this big gap where you had companies and people out there using people's data without permission. And at around the same time, people were getting really upset about this and demanding to their lawmakers that laws got passed to give them rights to say, I have the right to tell a company to delete my data or do not sell my data. And so I felt like there was a missing link between the feelings and the angst of consumers and these laws that were getting passed that were giving consumers rights, but there was no software platform, really effective software platform that was delivering data rights requests at scale. And so that was sort of the idea for Optery, was a software platform that sends legal demands to companies that says, do not sell my data, delete my data. And that's really what started Optery. And I've been thinking about this problem for many years, starting at Blue Kai and at Oracle and at Accenture. And it kind of all came together. And I quit my job at Accenture and started the journey of starting this company, which now it's been like, I think like 5 years or so since that. With AI now, like the stakes are higher, the tools are more powerful, the technology is more powerful. And it's just an ever growing problem. It's not like it's something that's going away. It's just continuing to explode.
So, given that the early version of Optery was pre AI, kind of like the pre AI boom. So, how did the early version of Optery differ from what the platform is today?
Well, the first version of Optery was in true early stage startup mode. We launched the product initially. People would sign up, and we had on the site. Today we cover around 650 or so data brokers automatically, and that's almost all automated. But when we first launched, I think we covered around 100, 150 data brokers, and it was automated to the extent that I went to each and every data broker website and scrolled to the bottom of the page and clicked their privacy page or their do not sell page and solved CAPTCHAs and submitted the opt-outs by hand. So I did that for a month or two to really deeply understand like what it went into, like what happened, and how you get these things, the data removed. So at the very, very beginning, it was 100% manual. So we did have a website, an app. You could log in, put a credit card in. You could see your data brokers, and we have different statuses. Today, we still have statuses, and status might be submitted. We submitted the request, or it could be removed. Okay, it's been removed. We've confirmed that it's been removed. Or maybe it's pending. It's been submitted, but we're waiting to hear back. And so initially, I was going in and submitting it, and then clicking like a drop down. And then maybe a week later, I'd go back and check, and then be like, okay, it's been removed. Great. Now it's changed the status from submitted to removed. So that happened for like a month or two, but then the demand was really coming in quite heavily. That was never the long term plan, and so we began the automation. And so today everything is largely automated. There's still some manual effort involved, some like QA and that kind of thing, but you have sort of pre AI and post AI. So initially, very initially manual, and then we have pretty advanced crawler scraper operations where we have essentially like crawler scraper bots that go out and search hundreds of data broker sites to see if you're there. And if we find you there, there's matching algorithms to say, oh, this is our customer. We basically will submit an opt-out request to the data broker. That can happen in a variety of different ways. So and we have essentially different like templates for every data broker. So in some data brokers, it's really just you send them an email, you send them the link of where you've been found, and you ask, say, hey, like we're making a CCPA request, please do not sell or delete this information. Others, you populate a form, you solve a CAPTCHA, you put in a confirmation email. And we cover 600 and something data brokers. Every one is a little bit different. And so we basically encoded all of those things that someone might do manually. Like let's say you wanted to do this, it would take you weeks to go to each one. We basically encoded all of that effort into code. And then what's happening now is we're using AI, agentic AI, to use a lot of the tooling that we've built out, tooling for SMS verification. All these data brokers will require SMS verification or email verification. We use AI to write those emails, read the responses, respond to those responses. So we've migrated our platform from initially me with hands-on keyboard to kind of like point automations to agentic AI, which is where we're today and going forward.
I like how you have that typical early founder story where it's like everything was extremely manual and we had to do this by hand and then eventually scaled up as the business scaled up. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, with the number of customers that we have today, if we did it manually, I mean, we'd have to have, I don't know, thousands of employees doing what I did initially back in June of 2021. I think it was when we launched. You just couldn't do it. It'd be impossible. And that's probably why we exist as a company. As an individual, is basically impossible. And not only just the submitting the opt-outs, but keeping track of this stuff. So we have uh, ongoing scanning where we're scanning, multiple times per month, where we go out, we scan hundreds of sites. We say, oh, we've been found. And so it's just impossible. The problem is impossible for an individual to go out and manually search hundreds of sites, weekly or monthly, and then submit the removals. And then you've got new data brokers that are launching and coming out online, and many that you submit the removal and then they add it back after 6 months, even though asked them not to. So it's a problem that needs to be dealt with by software.
Yeah, it's impossible. So, speaking of the fact that this business has grown as much as it has, you have managed to grow a large consumer business while also serving thousands of organizations. So, how did you decide to pursue both B2C and B2B instead of focusing on just one?
Yeah, this is a really important question for us as a company early on, and a really challenging question. It's one of those things where you have maybe investors or advisors or YC partners, or a YC company, and you talk to 10 different people and they give you 10 different answers. We essentially had like a lot of people that we really kind of trust and respect their points of view, and maybe a third said stick with B2C. You can't try and do two businesses at once. A third probably said, you've got your product up and running. You need to pivot hard into B2B, and you need to run the B2B business. It's a much better business. And then others, maybe a third, were like, yeah, you should do both. And we ultimately decided to do both. And for us, what happened was we had the B2C product out, and we just started getting a lot of inbound requests from companies that were saying, hey, I use another service. We've been testing you out. You're much better. Or, I am a security professional at my company. I use you in my personal life, and my team needs this, or my department needs this, or my company needs this. And we just kept hearing this over and over again. And initially it was like, well, what do we do? We don't want to, we have to build out a whole new go-to-market strategy, a whole new team, a whole new everything. And the requests just were just too difficult to ignore. And so we decided to build out our B2B product. So we kind of Optery operates at this point soup to nuts. We have a free tier where anybody can sign up for free, get free scans, quarterly scans, and self-service tools to go do the opt outs themselves. We have plans for individuals. We also have plans for families. Optery for Family is very, very popular and in itself is a decent sized business. And then, kind of the next iteration there was Optery for Business. And then from there, we actually started hearing from a lot of companies saying, hey, we want to offer this to our own customers. We are a cybersecurity company and we sell maybe like a holistic cybersecurity suite. We want to layer in scanning and removal from data brokers. So then we built our API. So we have the free tier, individual plans, family plans, business to business, where a company uses us and then pushes out subscriptions to employees and executives. And we have an API where other companies, typically it's cybersecurity companies, will use us. And behind the scenes, buried in the terms of service, we are powering the data removal and scanning within their kind of like application. Where we are today, I'm very happy with the decision that we made. I think it was like in maybe 2022 to build the B2B. And the reason is because it's really diversified our revenue base. And B2C actually, it turns out to be a really good lead generation tool for the B2B business. So it's very common that when we get our B2B inbound prospects, we always ask them, well, how did you hear about us? And it's very common that they'll reference some sort of a B2C use case. Either, hey, we were starting to look at solutions and some of the employees here at our company mentioned that they use you. So turns out we want to include you in the evaluation process for this, or, just through B2C types of marketing. So there's a lot of really successful companies that have done B2B and B2C, especially in the cybersecurity space. If you look at companies like McAfee, or maybe like Nord Security, or maybe Malwarebytes, these are companies that sell, often they started off selling to consumers and then started selling to businesses. Even look at like Canva, and the list goes on, Zoom. And so for us, it's been a really nice, because sometimes, we'll have a month where maybe it's a softer month on the consumer side. And then, hey, we had a really strong month on the business side, or vice versa. So it's been great to diversify the revenue base.
So, how did you ultimately decide to filter out all of those different kinds of advice you received and focus on what your gut was?
It's really tough, right? Especially, for us, we went through Y Combinator and you get really tremendous advice there. And we have a lot of, really incredible seed stage investors we love and our treasure really. And A Capital is one of them. We treasure that relationship.
Thank you.
Not all advice is good, and you never really know. I mean, ultimately, you have to make your own decision. I mean, that's just a given. But I always think back where, if you remember this, but in 2023, Silicon Valley Bank basically collapsed, and then shortly thereafter, First Republic collapsed, and that was kind of this like mini crisis. A lot of people were really worried about making payroll, and it was a really, really traumatic and dicey time. One of our investors basically set up a meeting with me and was like, you need to cut half your team. You need to go into like lockdown mode. And we're like, this thing is bad. You're never gonna be able to raise money again. You're gonna just like batten down the hatches, like cover your acorn, hide under the mattress. And I heard this person out, and I respect this person a lot. And I was like, okay, we'll think about that. And we put up a bunch of racks and hired, and we've grown the business like 15x since then, revenue wise. That was advice I was not going to take. But there's other times when you get advice that you hear it and you're like, yeah, that makes sense. Let's think about it. So ultimately, you have to make your own decision. You can't, nobody knows your business the way, the founders know the business. It's just impossible. You got to listen to everything. At least for me, I listen to everything, but ultimately you kind of have to make your own calls. Same thing with the B2B versus B2C thing. I'm happy that we went with the B2C. Very happy about it.
So, speaking of B2B and B2C, what are the biggest differences in how individuals versus enterprises think about their privacy risk?
Yeah, so I think individuals, I mean, it's very different. It's very different. And the way that the products are bought is very different. And that's one of the challenges of having two different P&Ls. We have a B2C P&L, a B2B P&L. I have two different teams working on them, especially from the go-to-market perspective. I think individuals, one, for individuals, a lot about just, is my home address on the web or not? So individuals, it's a lot about like, hey, I Googled my name or somebody Googled my name or I'm worried someone's gonna Google my name and they're gonna know where I live. It's just like that's like a really, really dominant thing on the consumer side. And so the other thing would be just people that just don't want to be taken advantage of and don't want anything out there about them. It's just more of like a personal decision and a kind of a personal choice. But with the businesses, it's much more calculated, and it all really a lot of it really boils down to risk and preventing hacks and attacks and breaches, and it comes down to much more of a calculated purchase. Because the end of the day, a business is making a business decision, and they're looking at risk. They're trying to reduce risk. They're looking at like what's the cost of a breach, what's the cost of something going wrong with our cybersecurity posture, leading to exfiltration of data, et cetera. And so it's a much more calculated kind of a decision. And so it really, in that sense, it really ties back a lot to reducing risk for social engineering and phishing.
You've been open about rebuilding your user acquisition infrastructure after outgrowing earlier systems. What signals told you it was time to rebuild from the ground up? Because that's a really tough call to make.
Yeah, definitely. We historically had just used Google Ads in terms of paid. That was all we did with paid was Google Ads. And in terms of wanting to scale out on the B2C side and really the B2B side as well into additional channels, we needed to move to a server to server based conversion tracking and a much more robust consent management system. And so we had to go from something that was just very basic that was built maybe in, I don't know, 2022 to something that was much more modern. It was definitely one of these things like, within any company, you have something that was like built, it works. And then maybe a few years later, you're like, okay, we've really outgrown that. We really need to address that. And so we had basically set up Google Ads, conversion tracking in 2022, and we needed to move to server to server, and we implemented server side consent. As a privacy company, we've always taken consent and tracking it very seriously, and so we wanted to really just double down on that and get as robust as we could in the tracking side for digital ads and also be able to scale out to other channels.
Is there any kind of conflict between going out and finding customers and also privacy, like the way you guys approach privacy? Is it?
There is. Yeah, there is. And there's a competitor in our space. I think they ended up kind of rolling back on this, but in the earlier days, they kind of prided themselves as not using any social media and not using Google Analytics or Google Ads or using anything. And that was kind of like a point of pride. But what ended up happening is it hid them away.
Yeah.
Fast forward to today, I think they're like on TikTok and they're doing all kinds of like anything and everything because it's a privacy service. They were sort of like, hey, we're going to be super private. We're not going to do anything related to social media. But then by doing that, nobody can find you. Nobody knows about you.
Right.
So there's really a spectrum. And for us, this sort of decision is like, well, where do you want to be on that spectrum? Do you want to hide yourself away, swear off any social media? You just got to find us through word of mouth. That's one way to do it. If you're a privacy company and there's a lot of legitimate concerns that people have with social media companies if you care about privacy. The other way to do it is just sort of like free for all, no holds barred and use anything and everything. We've taken the stance of being, I don't even want to say in the middle, but like maybe on the more conservative side. Like there's a reason that we've only ever used Google Ads. At this point, we're also testing out a little bit on Reddit. Haven't we've never done anything on TikTok yet. And so, I think it's just as a company, you kind of have to decide what business you're in and what your users care about. And so we've approached it pretty cautiously in terms of what we do in terms of marketing and maybe perhaps too cautiously, but we have consent management for users if they want to opt out of tracking. We actually have our own global privacy control Chrome extension that people can use to basically kind of block tracking they use for GPC. So we've taken conservative side, but not hide away in a hole and nobody can find us. And we have a YouTube account, we have an X account, we have a Meta page, and we do a decent amount on Google.
I guess there's also an argument to be made that, like, if these customers can be found, then they need you. You know what I mean? Like, if these customers can be found by certain programs that don't necessarily care as much about privacy as you do, then they could benefit from using you guys. And maybe in the future, you wouldn't be able to find them if they were using you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things that we could do. that I think would, but we just don't do them because we feel like it's counter to our mission and vision. So there's things that we could do that we just don't do, and we probably compromised us on the revenue side, but
Hmm.
we just can't do it because we just don't feel like it's the right thing to do. There's definitely some like marketing tactics that we think like, oh man, if we did that, that would be through the roof, but we just couldn't bring ourselves to do it. We just don't feel like it's right.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And it's also, I think, pretty honorable. So, how do you balance short term performance dips with long term scalability when making decisions that are a complete overhaul of the processes you've had before?
Yeah. I mean, I think you have to be always thinking long term and short term, primarily long term, but a little bit short term. I think that a lot of people get in trouble where they just think long term and they kind of build castles in their head. And it's, oh, one day we're going to like take over the world. The next thing you know, it's been 2 years and, they haven't been on a path for that. So I think you always have to be thinking long term and short term. Long term are more primarily, but you definitely can't ignore the short term. For us, we actually, at the very incorporation of the company, we set out like a long-term, three-phase plan, and, we're actually right now, as we turn the page on 2026, embarking on the third phase, and the third phase as originally defined in 2021. So we've always had this kind of long-term overarching vision of Optery as a data rights management system, and it's had three phases, and we're kind of embarking now on the third phase. So that has provided a north star for us in terms of like what are we doing as a company? Why is it that we've chosen to work at Optery? Why is it that we care about what we do for consumers? What impact, what difference are we making in the world? And that ties into our long-term plan, our long-term vision and mission. But then you've got kind of the short term, and the short term is, what's happening on the ground today. What does, spend look like? What does revenue look like? What does retention look like? What does churn look like? What does headcount look like? And they all have to kind of tie together. If your short term is not aligned with the long term, then something's probably wrong, either with the long term or with the short terms. For us, we operate kind of like on a monthly and a quarterly and a yearly basis. So we have kind of monthly goals, monthly objectives. We have quarterly goals, quarterly objectives, and yearly goals and yearly objectives. And so I think, and then we have this overarching like three-phase multi-year vision. So it all has to kind of connect. And that's how we operate. We're thinking about the short term on a month basis. We're thinking about the medium term on the quarter basis, medium to long on the yearly basis, and then everything on the multi-year basis as well. It's all important and it's all tied together.
So, how is AI changing what's possible in privacy protection? Like, I know that because as we're your investors, we get your investor updates. So, I know that you've rolled out features like AI exposure reports and AI powered custom removals. But how did those come about? And do you plan to go further?
We'll probably be making some announcements in terms of what we're doing on AI this quarter. We do a lot with AI, but we haven't announced, everything. One of the things that we did about a year ago was one of the things that was really popular for Optery is something called removals reports. And so when somebody first signs up for Optery, we do a deep crawl scrape scan of hundreds of data brokers, and we take screenshots of the places that you've been found on data broker sites. When a typical person signs up in the US, we typically will send them a report that'll have about 100 screenshots of where they've been found. If that person had previously been using a competitor, the report will have about 50 screenshots of where they've been found and what the competitor has missed. And this has come up over and over and over again. So we have that baseline of what's been found. And then from then forward, we're doing monthly or quarterly, kind of depending on the plan, scans to generate more images. And then what we do is we send out quarterly removals reports before and after. So you can see, oh, I was found on white pages, and there's a place on white pages has a link to it. And so we'll go visit the link and we'll take a screenshot and say it's been gone. It'll usually say something like this profile has been removed, page not found. And so we'll send that out to the customers. It's basically our proof of work. It's saying, hey, here's a report side by side, 100 screenshots of where you were found. And now 3 months later, maybe 80 of them are gone and we're still working on the other 20 or something like that. So that all was done automated for a long time, but we used to have a human QA those reports. So they would go through and QA them and look at them. And that became very time consuming and very costly. So we basically switched that over to AI, but as an opt-in feature. And we basically sent a message to our users and said, you can have just non-AI QA'd removals reports, or you can have AI QA them. And AI is better than our just kind of like homegrown matching algorithm. And I would say probably about 50% of people have opted into it. So that was one of the first things that we did where we put AI into the product. And what did that do? One, it enabled us to take a lot of humans out of the loop from doing that QA. And two, it enabled us to increase the accuracy. And the other thing about the accuracy is if we go do that scan and we see the before and after, and we say, oh, maybe a profile has popped back up or profile is still there, that triggers a job to go submit an opt-out. So it really benefits people to opt into the AI because the AI is more accurate. And then it's determining whether or not the profile is removed or not. If it's not removed, we're going to kick off a job to go do a removal. So that's one thing. And I mentioned a little bit before our agentic AI system, which is essentially where we have an Anthropic model that's operating a lot of our infrastructure that's goal based and saying, okay, I can skin a cat in many different ways, and okay, I'm going to try this way and I try that way, and basically operating more like a human does, as opposed to like just sort of like batching different processes. So that's a little bit about kind of what we're doing right now.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. So, how do you think about transparency and trust when building privacy technology?
Yeah, it's a good question. One is kind of doing the right thing within the walls of the company to protect people's data. And then two is communication and transparency with users and customers as to what's happening. Not that this is an end all be all, but we've had our SOC 2 type 2 for several years. It was one of the things that we had to do when we started selling to companies. You go through rigorous security reviews to sell to the government or to banks or, publicly traded companies, which are all are free for business customers. So we've been going through SOC 2 process for many years, and that's beyond just a checklist. That's actually securing the company with penetration testing, access controls, processes. We have locked down browsers that prevent people from taking information out of browsers. Lots of different things that we do to secure people's data. And then two is we try to be very transparent in terms of what's happening with people's information. So even, for example, I mentioned the use of AI. We made opt-in so that people can opt in to that functionality. And so we try to be very transparent with people. And then back to that spectrum that we talked about like sort of like not using any marketing tools or just having a free for all. We've opted on to more of the conservative side with honoring consent management and being very careful and choosy about what marketing vendors that we use. Really data minimization, like minimizing the amount of data that we collect and kind of use for people, and also minimizing the vendors. Every new vendor that we use goes through a security review. There's all different types of vendors that you use, and everyone goes through a security review before it's approved. It's not like someone could just say, "Oh, I'm going to just create an account at such and such SaaS platform." It goes through a review before it is approved for license or purchase.
So, Optery recently launched publicly in Canada, opening the door to international expansion, which is huge. What did you learn from preparing the product for a new market?
Starting in 2023, when we began selling to businesses for Opry for Business, there was an immediate demand to be able to support employees and executives internationally beyond the United States. You can imagine we needed to close a big financial services company, and they said, we've got, you know, 10% of our people in London and 5% in Hong Kong, et cetera. So we actually had to build out our internationalization at that point, but we withheld it from the consumer market and we're just selling to US based companies and supporting international employees and executives. And Canada was where the most users were. And then meanwhile, on the B2C side, anybody can sign up. And if you sign up from a country other than today, the US and Canada, but as of maybe 6 months ago, just the US, you'd get a message that said, we don't support your country at this time, but if you want to complete the registration, we'll notify you when your country is supported. And we looked at the registrations, and Canada had the highest number. So we really honed in on Canada, and the product had already been internationalized. It was really just about one, getting our privacy policy and terms of service all defined for Canada. So we actually worked with a Canadian security and privacy lawyer to get all of our terms and privacy policy, make sure everything was aligned and proper for Canada. And then we had to deal with multi-currency with our pricing. So we had to do local currency localization for the Canadian dollar. And so we kind of knocked those things out and then did a launch. So we now are open for business in Canada, and we have Canada is like going like this in terms of just revenue and customers, and it's been a good thing. We're kind of teeing up Australia next and then the UK. And really from a product perspective, it's all done. It's really just about making sure that we're compliant and in line from a legal perspective. So terms of service and privacy policy and just everything that we need to do to make sure that we're in line with the laws in those countries. But yeah, it's
Yeah.
super exciting. And it's just a new revenue channels for us that just didn't exist before.
Really, really cool. Congratulations. I have two more questions for you. The first one is this: Optery is seed funded and hasn't raised a Series A yet, despite significant scale. How do you think about fundraising versus maintaining flexibility?
Yeah, this is another one of those where I think, so we are seed funded, just on safe notes. And we very consciously have not uh, raised a Series A yet. I think that will change right around now. I think right now, kind of turning the page on 2026, we're finally ready to make a move in this area. So certainly I've had conversations in the past, but it's never felt like the right time for us. But now it has and it does. One, we operated kind of cash flow positive for most of the last year. Wasn't even, we basically were able to use our cash from operations to fund our growth. We hit cash flow profitability, I would say like mid 2024. And, at that point, we were still growing pretty rapidly. And I just felt like we could keep going with internally generated cash flow. And so I personally don't view raising a lot of money as like the end all be all. I'm really trying to build a successful business. But I think at this point, with where we are and where the business are, I think it feels like the time now is right to actually take on a larger round of capital. So I feel like it has to be right for the business. Like just didn't want to be like, just do a Series A for the sake of doing a Series A, especially if the business is operating well and the business is growing. So we just didn't feel like the right thing for us up until now, but I think that's going to change here in 2026.
I think that's really smart. Think conversely, as an investor, a lot of people would probably expect me to be like, oh, raise money as soon as you can, as fast as you can. I totally agree with the fact that if you want to build something and make it last, you need to make sure you have all your ducks in a row and make sure that you're doing what's best for you when it's best for you. So I think that's an approach to be admired personally. But I think we have officially run out of time, sadly. Lawrence, thank you so much for joining us. Optery is tackling one of the most important and personal problems in the digital age, and it's been absolutely fascinating to hear how you've scaled the company while staying deeply mission driven, which is incredible. For listeners who want to learn more, you can visit optery.com or follow Optery and Lawrence on LinkedIn. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode.